There are no big traumas or little traumas. Trauma is trauma because it comes from our nervous system capacity and flexibility to be able to deal with whatever the challenge is in that moment. And if for whatever reason, our nervous system is overwhelmed and full already when we're a child and a parent perhaps looks at us in a way that makes us feel not good enough, we can store that as trauma. So as Gabor Mate says, trauma is not what happened to you, is what happens to you as a result of what happened to you.
Hi, everyone. You haven't heard from me before, but my name is Riley, and I'm one of the producers of Prey vs. Predator. I wanted to hop on quick and let you know that if you like this podcast and want to help keep our community alive, we'd love it if you'd consider supporting us on Patreon. You can choose between a one-time gift or regular donations for as little as $3 a month. All donations go toward production costs so we can continue this project for years to come. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, welcome back to Prey vs. Predator. We are so happy for everyone to join us today. We have an amazing guest that we're all pumped for.
So excited.
It is Carla Shohet, who is a trauma and narcissistic abuse recovery psychologist from the UK, and we are thrilled to have you today.
Woo! We have been following you for the last year or so, loving your energy, loving what you're bringing to our community. And we are thrilled to just be here. And you're a psychologist in the UK, but you're a whole bunch of other things. Can you give us a little rundown of what some of those other things are that you do?
Yes. So as you rightly said, I am a trauma and narcissistic abuse recovery psychologist. I'm also a somatic therapist, a brain spotting practitioner, and a positive psychology coach. And what all that really means is that I am a psychologist who specializes in root cause resolution on a nervous system level, not just symptoms management.
Unbelievable. And we're just so thrilled because this is really, I think, I don't know how you feel, but as somebody who's in the therapy world, this is sort of on the cusp of the sort of cutting edge stuff. It's rather new.
Yes, you're right.
So to have somebody with, those credentials bringing that information to our audience, we're pretty happy. We're pretty happy.
Me too.
Okay, so Carla, tell us about yourself. Like not only like we know your credentials, you're fantastic, but your life. Like, how did Carla get here?
Through my own somatic inner healing journey, which absolutely happened by accident. I had been a counseling psychologist for a couple of decades without any knowledge of the fact that I had trauma and that I had suffered with narcissistic abuse. And I discovered that by pure accident through a contract that I was doing as a support therapist into a support community for women that had been in narcissistic abusive relationships.
So you're counseling them?
Yes.
And as you're counseling them, what's happening for you?
I start to go into a huge freeze response, shutdown, which is something I know now. At the time, I didn't know what was happening to me, but I literally felt like I was fading away and shrinking away, and I was more and more incapable of offering the support because with every time I supported a new lady and read their story and tried to support them, I realized more and more, oh my gosh, this may be what has been happening to me my whole life. And
wow,
my mind started to kind of get blown a little bit.
So what was it about, because I'm and I think because I'm relating so strongly to you, I've said many times on our podcast that I didn't have a language for this. And until I so desperately needed to gain a language because I could tell it wasn't any other language that I had been exposed to wasn't fitting. Was it like that for you? Or what was it about working with these women that started to, was it the pattern that you saw in them? Was it that they were putting words to it? Like what was it that was awakening for you?
That's a really good question, thinking back now. And I think it was, I could relate to the pain, that kind of inner pain that they were feeling. And I started to think, okay, well, in sharing their story, I could see where that pain was coming from. And I was thinking, well, have I been in a narcissistic, abusive, intimate relationship? Don't think so. how is it that I can relate to their pain then? And I started to question really, not in conscious awareness, I would say, but it started to affect me physically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bit I noticed. I noticed that I was getting more and more depressed, more and more shut down, and I was more and more unable to offer support because I was feeling so heavy, literally in my body and my head, myself. And I didn't know what was happening to me.
Right.
So other than feeling depressed and heavy, what were some other physical symptoms that you felt?
Interestingly, I suffer with a couple of chronic illnesses, actually, one of which does cause me facial pain and head pain.
Okay.
One of those typical chronic illnesses that I now understand trauma causes because they are linked to the vagus nerve, which is something that we may discuss together in future episodes.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of pain, not just in my head, but physical pain, my back, because trauma is stored in your body, in the fascia, which is that fiber that holds all of our organs together, and it gets affected, it gets tightened by stress hormones that we are not able to release because our nervous system capacity is overwhelmed by the amount of trauma that we are invisibly carrying in our little invisible backpack that is literally invisible to ourselves as well as other people. And it literally tightens our muscles. It affects us on a physical level. A lot of chronic illnesses that are difficult to understand the root cause of, or difficult to kind of resolve, usually have a trauma link.
Can you maybe, for our listeners, maybe give a couple examples so that we can, maybe if people are listening going, hey, I have that.
Yeah, so I have something called hemicrania continua, which it's paroxysmal. So it's one side of my face. I'm on lifetime medication for it to numb out the pain. And it's literally affects the whole side of my face on the left. I get intense sudden pain without any warning that literally shuts me down. I can't move. All I can do is cry. Luckily they, through a series of medical interventions, they discovered what it was. It was misdiagnosed several times because it's such a rare disease. And it was only through my own inner healing journey that was somatic that I started to understand about polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve, which we all have, and how that is affected through trauma, and how that, gets damaged through trauma, and how that can cause inflammation in the body, and cause lots of different chronic illnesses. People also that I work with have things like fibromyalgia, inflammatory kind of diseases. I also suffer from a chronic gut disease. Again, not surprising once you understand all about the vagus nerve, which I hope to share with the audience, because it's so important. We have this incredible highway communication system in our body, and we are never taught about it. Even as psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, we have no knowledge of it. It's just not, it doesn't form part of the basic foundation of our learning, and it's totally connected to trauma. It's totally connected from the back of our brainstem travels right through and wraps around all our organs, our major organs, and it affects. It's affected by trauma massively.
I feel like we could go. I feel like we could go all these different directions. So what I want to do here is I want to go back to your story, and I want to. We're at this point where for you're the person brought in to help these women. And now you're experiencing these really powerful somatic experiences, and you're noticing your own trauma sort of awakening. And how do you begin the journey of putting words to this, or like, how did you get from there to where you are now?
Yeah. So at one stage, about 4 months into this contract, I just wasn't capable of doing the work anymore. I just couldn't physically make myself read through any more messages, read through any more pain, read through any more stories, because every time I did, I relived my own trauma. Mm-hmm. Again, something I didn't understand at the time that I do now, because trauma isn't just experienced directly, but also indirectly through stories. And eventually I had no choice but to reach out to the lady whose community I was supporting. And she didn't know who I was because I was working for her through an agency indirectly. So I contacted her and I said, I need help. I think maybe I've got trauma, and maybe I'm realizing that I may have been through narcissistic abuse. Told her my background story of having been a psychologist, and, briefly explain my life story as much as you can within a discovery call. And she said, well, I'm just about to launch this certification. And I think because of your background and what you've just told me, I think it would be really, really helpful for you to do this work, because it could resolve not just your personal healing, but also professionally. You could do something more. We had quite a long conversation, and I wasn't keen to do this, to be honest. I just really wanted to fix myself because I was broken, right? That's how we get to that point where we just heal my inner child, just fix it. I needed to be well. I have 3
What
young.
was that certification that she proposed to you?
So it's for coaches. It's for trauma informed.
Okay, so it was a trauma informed approach that you perhaps hadn't embraced before.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't really ask too many questions about it. I mean, I didn't have full trust, but I thought, well, what else? I don't have any other choice. I can either be just like this, shut down, or I can follow her advice. And it was literally last chance saloon for me, because I had been through so much therapy. I'd invested, upwards of 6 figures for incredible, world leading coaches in personal development, business development over the years. And they'd helped up to a certain point. I was able to reach further levels in my professional and personal healing. But it was always quite superficial. It was quite kind of mindset based, motivational based, and they only can ever have short-term effects, because you're not ever looking at the root cause of, why you feel the way you feel, why you behave the way you behave. So I'd never really touched upon any of that. And it was frustrating because you keep going high and then low, high and then low. And even the somatic healing journey is like that. It's a roller coaster. It's not linear. But you get to start feeling shifts within your body. You get to actually feel different in your skin. It's a very, very difficult experience to explain to someone who hasn't felt it and been through it themselves. And I wouldn't have understood it maybe even if it had been explained to me, because you can only really understand what you've already experienced. Right. I believe, you can understand things cognitively, but that's very, very different from experiencing them in your body. And so, yes, I went on the certification with very, very little hope that it would do anything. I thought, I'm just being sold another program, yet another program. Here we go again. I'm going to do this and I'm never going to heal. Actually, within the first 2 weeks, I think I did one of the first somatic exercises. It was creating kind of an ideal mother resource. And I just couldn't think of one thing that would form a trait of an ideal mother, and that shut me down completely. It triggered me so massively. I just went into an even darker place. I was like, that's it. I'm never going to heal. I'm never going to be able to get out of this. How can I not even know or even make up a trait for a person that, I should be able to at least imagine. And again, I reached out to this therapist and she said to me, it's okay. It's too soon. Just leave it. I thought, well, how's that going to help me? Because we're so used to do, right? We're not used to kind of, just sitting with our emotions, which is very much part of somatic healing. It's actually acknowledging, recognizing the feelings that come up rather than suppressing them and pushing them down, which is what we're taught in society to do. Just, box it up, put it on a shelf and just leave it alone. It'll be fine, But unfortunately, whenever we suppress anything, it will eventually bubble up. You can't get away from it.
So you take this, so you're taking this course, you're noticing things that you're bumping up against your own physiological responses to things. And how does that transform?
There are lots of aspects to somatic healing that I experienced that were really, really helpful. I mean, there was loads of moments like that dark place, lots of them. Lots of ups and downs, lots of triggering moments, writing my own trauma timeline, for example. When you go back from in utero right to the moment that you are in today, and you start kind of looking at things that happened to you that could have been perceived by you as traumatic, stressful. And my experience was I sat there and I thought, nothing happened to me. Nothing bad happened to me. I mean, I had a great childhood. So I started writing my own trauma timeline. And initially I sat there for probably half an hour just staring at a blank sheet of paper thinking, well, I don't have trauma, because that's another thing we do, right? We diminish and minimize our experiences because, look at them, they've been sexually abused. They've been in domestic abusive relationships and, there's been physical violence. And we never really look at things that could be emotionally or psychologically damaging to us. We are again, I mean, in this country, for example, it makes me think of the slogan, keep calm and carry on. I don't know if you guys know.
Yeah, we know
Yeah.
that.
British.
Yeah.
That's just the way we're taught to be in society. Just keep calm and it's not that bad. Come on. So, I even struggled to really identify my own traumas until suddenly one thing came up and then the next thing came up and the next thing and the next thing. I should have got it out and showed it to you. It's 4 pages long.
Wow.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think we do have that idea of trauma being big, massive things. And I know I've studied a bit of this. And can you give us, as a therapist who works on a regular basis, what kind of things can be traumatic? What could be considered as trauma for some people?
Anything.
Yeah.
So whenever there's a big misconception about the word trauma, because our mind goes to, sexual abuse or, something, really violent, like, someone being stabbed or someone witnessing a robbery
or
childhood abuse, those kind of things. And yes, there are traumas as well, but there are lots of non-obvious causes of trauma that we just, even our professional mental health field, we don't even recognize as trauma. It could be financial difficulties in the family, parents who always come late to pick you up. It could be, a dentist intervention that required an anesthetic. It can be, being bullied at school. It can be your parents constantly arguing because they're going through a separation and they're nasty to each other. It can be not being invited to a party and feeling rejected. It could be, not being picked for the team or not being picked for that promotion. Because the truth is that trauma is not the event. It's the perception. It's our perception of the event that makes it a trauma or not a trauma. And there are no big traumas or little traumas. Trauma is trauma because it comes from our nervous system capacity and flexibility to be able to deal with whatever the challenge is in that moment. And if for whatever reason, our nervous system is overwhelmed and full already when we're a child and a parent perhaps looks at us in a way that makes us feel not good enough, we can store that as trauma. So as Gabor Mate says, trauma is not what happened to you, is what happens to you as a result of what happened to you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is what happens inside of you. Mm-hmm. What negative self-beliefs we form about ourselves, what we tell ourselves about what something that happened and how we dealt with it means about who we are. So as a child, and you're being playful and you're just being yourself, you're screaming, jumping, singing, and your parents have had a really tough day, the nervous system is at full capacity, and they say, shut up, go to your room. Mm-hmm. That can be a trauma. That can mean to a child who doesn't have the critical capacity because that part of that brain hasn't developed yet, depending on their age. Oh, when I'm being myself, I'm annoying, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable. So then the nervous system perceives that as life-threatening danger because the brain's job is to keep us alive. And when it perceives that we're not lovable, or we're not good enough, or we're not important, or we don't matter, or we're unworthy, or we're wrong in some way, for a child specifically, that is life-threatening danger, right? Because we need, as humans, we're a little bit rubbish. We need another adult to give us a sense of self-worth and give us protection and nourish us and look after us and give us love for us to actually survive and thrive and then reproduce eventually. And when the brain perceives that we're not important, we're not lovable, danger. I could die, because if my parent doesn't think I'm lovable, for example, my main caregiver, then who's going to feed me? I'm going to die. And then that forms kind of the basis of a negative self-belief in your nervous system, in your subconscious blueprint of who you think you are. And then the nervous system brings up coping mechanisms that we call personality traits. I call them protector parts from an internal family systems lens. And they are, those parts that whereas maybe the next day the child will become a people pleaser. If I'm really, really nice and I'm really quiet, maybe I'm become shy and I don't speak, maybe I won't get told off. And maybe my mum or whoever shouted at them, my teacher, my friend, will see that I'm good enough. And that's how we start to seek for validation externally, and for things that we do, not for just being who we are.
That's so like, I feel like there's so many sound bites here. And we're big Gabor fans as well. So
we love our Gabor.
I love Gabor as well. He's my inspiration for all this work, actually. And I had the absolute honor of meeting him in person only a few months ago because he was in London to launch his latest book,
Yeah.
The Myth of Normal. So it was just such an honor to shake his hand and listen to him and, live. It was amazing.
Okay, so my question is, how do we separate our actual personality traits, like who we actually are, from our trauma responses?
It's a big question. It's part of the inner work that we do as trauma therapists. It's called separating the timelines, essentially, between our protector parts and who our true self. We kind of unblend, because over time, when we have these protector parts that come up to protect us, to distract us away and soothe us away from feeling that life-threatening pain of I'm not good enough. Okay, that's the worst pain. The brain perceives it as the most life-threatening thing, to feel unworthy or not good enough, because it equals death, potential risk of death. So it forms all these sub-personality, ego states or protector parts, whatever, depending on which angle you look at it from.
I think it could be terrifying to look at letting go of those protective parts, because really that's what's been keeping us going, is those protective parts. So to think about letting those go, that's scary to me.
And also it can be scary from that perspective of, if I let go of these personality traits of mine, then who am I?
Right.
Who am I? And a lot of the people that I work with have this sense of lack of self, because this is what happens when we don't have a secure attachment with our main caregiver, because we perceive that they don't see us as good enough. There is a kind of an attachment rupture there. And that's what leads us to feeling kind of, lack of self-worth. These inner wounds that I'm talking about are self-worthiness wounds, core inner wounds that we carry deep in our subconscious, our inner beliefs of ourselves. And when we don't have that, we don't have an identity, a real identity. We don't know who we are, and that makes us feel like we're lost. And so to let go of these personality traits that we think, I'm a kind, giving person. Well, it's great if you're coming from a place of abundance and you feel like you're overflowing with, goodness, love, and you can give from that place. But often we are codependent people pleasers who give from a place of emptiness and lack in order to receive back that validation that we are good enough. If I do X, Y, and there's loads of different protector parts, and it is hard to let go of them because of that sense of loss. But also we tend to not understand that those protector parts are there with loving intention, albeit destructive impact, because, being anxious or having panic attacks or having, pain like headaches, or having, a really strong anger part that, responds, aggressively to everything because it, constantly perceiving danger is uncomfortable. It does have a destructive impact, but there is a massive difference between these personality traits in their intent. They're there to protect us. They still see us as this hurt little child. They don't see us as the adult we are today. And they're constantly responding together with the autonomic nervous system, the brain, to constant cues of danger, because that's what a trauma brain is kind of changed physiologically, and it's kind of hypervigilant. One part of the brain literally inflates, and it becomes this kind of hyperactive surveillance system, constantly looking for, problems or whatever your version of normal is. And so, yes, it is hard to let go of those parts because they are there to try and protect us. And the nervous system doesn't want us to let go of those parts. And often we don't know their parts. We just think of them as us, as who we are. And there's lots of shame and guilt involved in all this as well.
What did you learn about yourself from this trauma timeline? Like if we go back to your story in trauma timeline history, what did you discover, or what did you take from that and move on with? Or how long did this process go for?
It's an ongoing process. I discover more and more with each layer that I grow to. As I grow into, a bigger public figure, more visible, there are different layers. I've just recently invested in more one-to-one help for myself, because it is a long life journey and it's a gift. Eventually you get to see it as a gift rather than, oh gosh, do I have to do this work? But what I discovered about myself is that it wasn't my fault.
Because we do tend to imagine that we I don't know. We have also talked quite a bit about the fact that everything you turn to in therapy, and I don't know if this was your experience. Certainly, it was mine, and probably all of ours. Everything we sort of turn to therapeutically, spiritually, it all kept focusing back on you can make a difference. You can make a change. You can change your relationship. You can change your relationship without talking about it. You can change your relationship by changing how you respond to it, by having better boundaries with it, by not accepting bad behavior, so all the language that I was bumping up against in my life around this subject throughout my life was always, you can do these things. And so every time I would come and I would think I had a new technique that was really going to help me improve the relationship that was toxic, or that would change the predator relationship I had. And that was the only language that I had. And I know for Jill, it was a spiritual language of pray more, pray harder, pray differently, pray,
become a spiritual leader. Yeah.
And so it was this like infuriating, overwhelming responsibility that you have. But there was did you find that? There was no therapeutic language I had for it's not your fault. Somebody's actually hurting you.
Yeah, 100% resonate with what you said there because, and it kind of makes me think back to my counseling days. And I wonder, I sometimes wish I could call back each of my patients and kind of, let's do a do-over. Let me tell you what I know now. But, all we can ever do is to do what we know until we know better, right? And, that's why I do what I do. That's why I'm here on this podcast. That's why I'm creating my own. That's why I have a free community. That's why I do the reels on social media as much as I can, because it is about that lack of understanding, because there isn't a language around it. There's a lot of shame and hiding. There's a lot of self-blame. It's a societal pressure as well that makes it, the language that you use, that kind of, it's all down to you. And it's actually true, but there is a massive misunderstanding about what that is. Because everyone's telling you, you can just, if you think positive thoughts and you will change your mood. That's actually scientifically wrong. You can't think yourself out of trauma. It's the other way around. And, so and as codependent people pleasing traumatized people, we end up taking on board, this on our shoulders and that on our shoulder. And we want to fix ourselves, fix the other people, fix the world. And it's exhausting because we actually don't have the tools. We don't know how. How do you then do that? No one teaches you. Even as a psychologist, I wasn't taught about how to rewire my nervous system and what somatic techniques can I use to release the traumas and release the stress in my body when new things happen. Our reproductive system is taught in schools, but not the nervous system and the brain. And I'm like, hold on, I've been working with people's brains for 2 decades. It kind of makes me cringe and it makes me angry and it makes me yeah.
Well, there's such a need for education, such a need for, like, one of the things that I value most about your work is you have the work behind you. You have a language for what to do. You don't just talk about these are the patterns, which I think is important. These are the patterns that we notice. These are the patterns we see. These are the predatory patterns that you can look out for. But I love your work in particular because you are creating what looks to me like a guideline with some guideposts along the way for actual healing, and taking people on a journey of processing the healing, working through the healing, and getting to a place where they become free of the things that held them down. And I think that is so unique to you and what you're doing. And I think that the people working with you are very blessed. Even watching you through the media that we've had exposure to you on, I think we've been very thankful that you're one of the few people in our sphere that really is bringing people along with your healing and your journey. You're able to bring people along with you. And I just want to take a moment to really shine a light on that because it's really different and it's very powerful. And I love that work that you're doing. And
well, why don't you tell us, like, how can people find you? What is your mission? All of this amazing things that PJ's talking about.
So people can find me on social media, both mainly on Facebook or Instagram. You can just look for Carla Shohet, Shohet. It's my married name. And you'll find me there pretty much every day. I share reels on a daily basis because, again, one of the biggest missions is to educate people so they don't feel that they are what's wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought most of my adult life, and actually even as a child, I did used to wonder, what's wrong with me? Am I adopted? And, I laugh about it now, but it's not funny because when a child is thinking, am I adopted? Because I'm so different and I think so differently. And yet on the outside, I was kind of nodding. Yes, I agree. Because I inherently knew that was my way of keeping safe within the family. People need the language, they need the understanding that there is nothing wrong with you. There really isn't. There really, really isn't. It's your beautiful, incredible brain and nervous system that does everything on an involuntary basis. It's your reactions that feel over the top that people call it, oh, you should be able to manage and you should be able to control yourself. Well, you can't. I'm telling you that from a scientific point of view. Our reactions when we have trauma are past trauma responses, which mean they're happening in less than a split second involuntarily from the autonomic part of our nervous system, which is the same part of the nervous system that operates our breath, our heartbeat, our digestive system, our immune function, involuntary responses. Okay, they happen automatically because the brain's purpose is for you to survive and be alive. Not for you to be happy, unfortunately. We're not born with that part of the nervous system that we have to be intentional about getting happy and, toning the part of the vagus nerve that allows for us to be, feeling safe and connected and grounded and thriving in life. And I mean, who knows that? Have you ever heard that, before, where you have to be intentional about, and a lot of these things we do here, but they are spoken about on a superficial level. Whereas actually there's a huge component which is missing, which is your nervous system, your brain, and what its functions are and how it's affecting you in your adult behavior and in childhood, and how perception affects all of that. And my mission really is my ultimate mission is to really educate people about the nervous system. I have psychiatrists and psychologists that comment on my reels in quite strong judgmental ways sometimes, and as soon as I kind of spend a couple of minutes replying, well, actually, judgment is a protector part and and I start going a little bit into the nervous system, they delete their comment and they thank you very much. And I get it. And it's not, I do it in the most trauma-informed possible way without trying to shame them, because I was them. Right. Totally. And I still wonder how many of my clients did I gaslight unintentionally and invalidated in their feelings because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So it's, for me, my ultimate mission is to help people to be able to heal themselves through learning about how their nervous system is operating and why it's operating and what can they do to regulate their own nervous system, because that is really what gives us, that's what we do have control over.
Right.
How do I go from feeling stuck and shut down to, having a little bit more mobile kind of energy in my body so I can do something, going back into sympathetic fight flight mode? Because, these parts of the nervous system are essential to us to live. We go into shutdown when we go to sleep and, when we have sex, even when we're really relaxed, or, we go into fight flight. And when we're feeling safe in our body, that fight flight energy, that sympathetic part of the nervous system gets us to be really focused and really determined and really, strong. But when we come from a trauma place where we're feeling not safe to be us, not safe in the world, not safe, that people aren't safe, that we're not safe, that's where things start to go wrong in terms of how we then experience our life, and we end up not living life. We end up existing and kind of, like a leaf in the wind. And we don't know, and we feel shame and we feel guilty and we feel all these bad feelings and we get, stressed and panicked and we don't know the way out. And it feels like you're walking in treacle, through this really dark tunnel without a light at the end. But there is a light and there is a way to heal that is long-term. And it's by looking at your nervous system. It's not by talking therapy or talking about your traumas. Actually, that can be re-traumatizing depending on, how you do it and what part of the nervous system you're in, because you can relive the traumas. So for me, the most important part of the work that I do, and this is how I start every journey with every new client, is the nervous system.
What's one thing that you do to regulate your nervous system?
Oh, one of my one of the most simple tools is breathing. And it's not just see a lot of the stuff, meditation and all these wonderful things that we get told to do. Meditation, for example, used to really trigger me because the minute I used to close my eyes and try and breathe, my brain would be like, completely in overload and couldn't stop thinking. Then I'd feel shame. I can't even do this, and it would just re-traumatize me and make confirm the fact that I wasn't good enough. But actually, there is a science. Once you understand the reason why meditation is good for you, then maybe you'll do it in a different way, and you won't shame yourself. Breath work was the same for me. It's like, breathe deeply and breathe out. And you're like, well, why? What's that doing? I'm one of those people that really needs to understand how things work. It's the nerd in me. I really need, and that's why I explain to my clients, breath work, a simple technique, 5 to 8 breath. You breathe in through your nose for a count of 5, you hold it for a count of 2, and then you breathe out really, really, really slowly, as slowly as you can for at least a count of 8. Why do you do that? That is a signal to your nervous system that right now, in that breath, you're actually not in danger. You're not about to be attacked, and it's communicating to the nervous system, you're safe right now. Because if you were in real life danger and there was an attacker, you'd be running and your breathing would be very shallow and fast. It'll be up here. There's no way in hell you'd be able to go. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So that is automatically a signal to the nervous system to say, okay, you can take a long exhale. So every time you extend your exhale, what you're doing is telling your inner system, no, there's no danger. Because if you're operating constantly in fight or flight, in that sympathetic kind of go, run energy, which most of us get stuck in, that's a survival part of the nervous system. You're not supposed to live in there. You're supposed to go in and out of that all day. But a lot of us with trauma get stuck in there, in that mode of kind of defense mechanism.
The long does the long exhale stimulate the vagus nerve too?
The vibration
Okay.
perhaps stimulates, things like humming or umming or singing.
I often do that.
There are different breathing techniques that are specific for shifting the nervous system state that are about vibrating the vocal cords, which then tones the vagus nerve at the social engagement part of the vagus nerve. So anything around kind of, anything that vibrates the vocal cords will heal the vagus nerve. Absolutely.
The only reason I say that is I do a version of what you do when I'm feeling a little panicked. But because I have a singing background, which might help some of our listeners, I know that when singing or doing any sort of music, you have to take a short in-breath, hold it, and then exhale slowly, holding your breath. And so that's really a helpful way for me to get into a different frame of mind. So I'll do humming or singing or whatever. So
yeah, and for me, I'm not a singer at all, but my experience with singing, which was super interesting, was that I couldn't sing anymore. I couldn't sing along to any songs. I couldn't even hear music because it triggered me so much. And every time I spoke, because the tone in my vagus nerve, especially in the top part, hence my disease, was so broken, so damaged that every time I tried to sing, I would get a knot in my throat and I would start crying. So of course I didn't anymore. And then I switched off the music. Also, your hearing, your eardrum actually gets affected by trauma as well through the vagus nerve and changes the way you perceive sound. And therefore, everything, all sounds in the background become very heightened and you get jumpy. And, there are so many parts of trauma that affect us in so many different aspects of how we are and how we behave and how we respond or react even. It affects every part of our life. Every single part of our life, every single part of our body. And when we don't know this stuff, we end up thinking, what's wrong with me?
Well, and this stuff isn't out there. I mean, it is out there if you're like, got a magnifying glass and you're actually intentionally looking for it. But even as somebody with a magnifying glass, intentionally looking for it, and as an educator in this area, it is really difficult to find other people who have research on this issue, who have expertise on this issue, we're starting. I feel like we're at this, like, the cusp of a very large movement. But but it's small right now.
It really is, and it shouldn't be. And also we need to consider as well that some of this stuff, like polyvagal theory, is only about 30 years old. So, as we go forward in science and we, study the brain more and more, we'll learn more and more. And so this is an ongoing journey for me. I'm still studying right now, and I'm still certifying in different, modalities. I'm, a top level brain spotter, and, all the different pieces brought together is what we need. It's not just one single thing. You can't just talk about the nervous system and just leave it at that. You can't just talk about, internal family systems and parts and leave it at that. It's all together that it makes sense. It's all together that you just start to really see. It's a bit like those, you remember those kind of 90s pictures where you had, are they 4D or 3D? I can't remember, but you stare at it for a long time and it's all kind of a blur. And then suddenly the image pops out. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Great analogy.
Wow, I see it now. And then you can't unsee it. So this stuff, once you learn it, when you go on your own somatic inner healing journey, the beauty of it is that it empowers you, it gives you the tools and the knowledge to be able to start looking at yourself from a very, very different lens. Instead of judgment, you look at yourself with compassion. And that's where it starts. You start kind of, even those little disconfirming experiences where you can look at yourself and think, oh, that's funny. Why am I feeling like that? I've been triggered because such and such. Oh, maybe that comes from that experience. And, you start kind of making connections in your brain about who you are. And then you can't unknow it once you know this stuff. You really, really can't. And it starts to give the nervous system disconfirming experiences. Instead of you going, oh, you're such an idiot, you responded like that. You start going, oh, I wonder why I responded like that. And that's a very different experience in your body, right?
A true healing. I feel like, I wonder if you would come back and do another episode with us, because I feel like I have this burning question to ask you, and
I really do
too.
And I'm just like, would you come back and join us on another podcast? Because
honestly, I would be absolutely honored to come back. You'd have to stop me.
We won't.
Awesome.
We welcome you. We welcome you with open arms.
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, well,
Thank you, Carla.
We will look forward to the next episode with Carla Shohet.
thank you, Carla.
Thanks, Carla.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We thought this was a particularly great episode and can't wait to have Carla back on. Tune in next week for part 2, where we do a deeper dive with Carla into the complexities of trauma recovery. You can keep up with us at Prey vs. Predator on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and of course on all major podcast platforms. We do our best to engage with our full online community. So if you have questions or comments about our show, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you.